We had the resistance movement, nationalist movement, and a due sense of pride in our traditions. Sometimes excessive pride. Some of us decided to go to the West to get many good things. Some of us decided to go to the past to get many good things. And we had a mumbo jumbo of, a very strange kind of hackneyed combination of good things from all over the past and the West, but not from here. We inherited this. In the 20th century, many very capable minds tried to counter this. I begin with, I cannot give all the examples, but I'll give 2 or 3 sample examples, samples. Very capable persons, and when I see their photographs, I bow down to them with immense respect. I begin with Sri Aurobindo, a man of extraordinary brilliance, great insights. But he felt that if India deserves a new aesthetic, it must be along the lines of the idea of mantra. The idea of mantra that Aurobindo proposed was not like the idea of kavita that probably Valmiki had, or like of literature that Bharat Muni had. In Aurobindo's idea of kavita, kavita was a means of ascension to higher level of consciousness. That was not bad. It was, I'm not trying to trivialize his views. He spent almost 40 years developing these views. He felt that when one uses poetry as a means of ascension to higher level of consciousness, probably the world will be a better place. He was trying to, and he had a great mastery of the Greek, Latin, French, English, and Sanskrit literature. And he was not writing light-heartedly, casually. It was not a research paper submitted for a peer review or serious stuff. But Aurobindo wanted to bring romantic poetry. When I say romantic poetry, it has nothing to do with the kind of romance that we see, in the films produced in this city. It's a technical term with which many of you are familiar. He wanted to bring the romantic kind of literature for getting infused with the mantra kind of inspiration, and that would be the poetry of the future. In fact, he wrote a book a series of essays then compiled, which he allowed, the series of essays he allowed to be published towards the end of his life, when he was 78, very mature yogi. The book is called The Future Poetry. He was trying to seek a synthesis of an older tradition and a distant tradition. Then comes towards a couple of decades later, Anand Kumar Swami, another great man. Rarely has such erudition, such eclectic acceptance, such itna large-hearted the wo. He moves me. I cry looking at his large-heartedness, because for him the Greek thought, the Roman thought, the German medieval thought, the ancient Sanskrit thought, pre-ancient Egyptian thought, 10th century Chinese thought, and 16th century Japanese thought could all sit comfortably together. The ekas panktit basun te rahu shakat hote. I cannot translate this in English. He believed in a kind of perennial thought which manifests itself in all thoughts in the world in all times. This goes against the very grain of what thought is, and how it situates itself in language, and how that language and therefore thought functions through the human consciousness, neurologically, psychologically, philosophically, and historically. We then had Mardekar here in Maharashtra, who was greatly taken up by the idea of aesthetics. And for him, crochet and the British were used by then, but the Italians were not. That was a novelty. Merdekar was brilliant in his modernist poetry in Marathi. He was a good novelist. He was experimental. But aesthetics, somehow he missed the point. I think it is at that point that Ashokji's contribution is very significant. Towards the end of this book on ethnomusicology, he says one thing that India proves is diversity is far more important for us than any historical coercion or domination, and therefore we know how to keep it alive. This is an extraordinary thought. I think for our times, because we are arrested in a web of traditions which we have inherited, and we obviously should not give up and cannot give up, both from the past and from the West. But these traditions cannot sit together comfortably because their making is in this attitude of imperfect creation, cosmic cyclicity, urge to express oneself, not the divine self, oneself, which is very different from this, the perceiver's mind is inadequate, or a great continuity of experience alone will make you capable of singing as well as listening, or this great subjectivity that the bhaktas brought to bear upon all expressions. These are philosophically, logically, in terms of their thought structures, they cannot be welded to. It's like you can make an alloy by bringing many metals together, but you possibly cannot put sugar and chili in water to make it either sweet or hot. I don't know if bhedaमध्ये करतात, pani puri and all that, but I don't know how that is done. The concluding paragraph of his book is diversity alone. Now, let me say something about this. The British not just truncated our imagination and twisted our memories, or rather, British did not do anything, but we did it in their presence. I mean, they were far too busy and not so numerous as we were, but it happened to us. Not just that, but they also segmented our society. I don't want to tell you the tragic story of how the criminal tribes were created in this country. It's mind-boggling. It's worse than what happened to the Jews in Germany. From 1871, wrongly crafted act of segmenting communities, declaring them as criminal by birth, segregating them, keeping them within fences, making them do labor, till 1952, when they were denotified, 190 communities. Today, there are about 6 to 7 crore people. The British also segmented us by creating a sector called tribes, because the forest land had to be taken over by the sovereign. The forests in India were brought under the sovereign domain through law, and those who were living there, they were told that this is not your land. You go wherever you want to, or you be subservient to us. I mean, in essence, that is the story. The social segmentation did not stop at just creating the craft people, the denotified. Some of them were performers, kolatis, the baul singers, the madaris, and so on. They were makers of musical instruments. Not just the craft people and the forest people, the earth people, but they also segmented us by creating a cartography of language and society. Grierson did a great job of language survey, but when he encountered about 700 samples, he quickly put 180 in one basket, saying they are good languages, they are full languages. and all the others he called dialects. So dialect is a little less than language. That is, you're okay, I mean, you're also alive, but not a human being as such. 600. So that shows the cartographic mindset. They did the social cartography, ethnographies, and through ethnographies, where caste was not entrenched or enforced, it was. Probably we surfaced out of that rule, and we went through the 20th century carrying all the pain of that rule in a highly fragmented manner, so much so that in fields of knowledge we fragmented ourselves. We said this is literature, but that is folk literature. This is literature, but that is folklore. This is fine, but that is oral. This is written, that is oral. This is good writing, that is Dalit writing. Here is the mainstream writing, and that's the Adivasi writing. We have not been able to describe till this day the form of art for which Maharashtra deserves 1,000 salutes, and that form of art is the Wari to Pandharpur. Can there be any better form of art where millions come together singing, dancing, losing themselves? We do not have one word by way of aesthetic register, terminology, concept to talk about the Wari. There are so about sajjas, about the gullies in my Gujarat. We don't have words at all. We don't have conceptual. We don't have categories to describe the rangolis. We have trashed a huge amount of art that we express because we have fragmented ourselves in the fields of knowledge. In the field of knowledge, we created those knowledges. They do not relate one to the other. This is documentary cinema, that is film, feature films. This is Bengali cinema, that's Marathi cinema. So you will have two different chashaks, two different awards for this. And our institutions have emphasized that fragmentation. And therefore, what we should appreciate as diversity comes to us as a huge heap of broken pieces, one not connected with the other at all. For our time, I mean, if Aristotle was thinking of unity, or Bharat was thinking of unity, continuity, for our time, diversity should be the episteme, the building block of knowledge when it comes to our thinking about aesthetics. Because in our times, God is fine. I mean, God is, I go to temple and I pray to God every time I appear for examination and court cases. I don't want to ridicule. Good. But in our time, there are other things happening. The earth is in danger. The extinction rate of the earth has gone up in our time, last 50 years, by 4,000 times in comparison to 100 years ago, the end of the beginning of the 20th century. How much we consume and how fast we are going to finish up the earth, it's 4,000 times more. We are pushing everything to some kind of extinction as some kind of last mad dance, crazy dance of madness. In our time, we know that everything depends on everything else. Poverty alone is not poetry, nor is wealth. In Hampi of the 15th century or Jaipur of the 17th century, wealth could be art. Lavish style could be art. In the writings of Chekhov or Premchand, poverty could be art, or in Dalit writing. Today we need both. I mean, I'm not saying we need poor people. I'm saying we know they're interrelated. Nothing is in isolation. There is no India in isolation of Burma or Pakistan or China or America or Europe. There's no social class that can be in itself self-engrossed. We need respect for diversity for this reason, that the earth will continue, remain alive. And all of us will have to accept that we belong to the earth does not belong to us. With that reverence for the earth, Mother Earth, and with that reverence for diversity, we'll have to look at our arts and accept all arts as art. That shall be our aesthetics in future. And that shall be the aesthetic in every form of expression. I differentiated between these two terms at the beginning. That's the closing sentence of the book. Indology and ethnomusicology. And it closes on this hint that whatever has happened to us, if we have to go ahead, we will have to have respect for diversity. With my salam to that diversity and with my salutes to this stalwart who introduced that hint, I conclude what I had to say. Thank you very
much. Professor Devi, one question, particularly related to Dr. Ranade, often said that the cultural zone for India stretches beyond to Afghanistan and to Iran. And in that context, how did the aestheticians from India in the 20th century and even prior to that look at the aesthetics of that region, and particularly as it was reflected in Persian sources?
We do worse than politicians. We do worse than politicians doing this. We have no knowledge of our neighbors at all. Just forget Western Asia. Zenda Vesta, for instance, our school children learn. But if anybody is asked, where is Baku? We don't, I mean, that's the place where Avesta probably was inspired. We know nothing about Burma. If I were asked to, if I were to be asked to name 10 towns, major towns in Burma, I don't have more than 3 names, perhaps. Even that with difficulty. We know nothing about Pakistan as it is today. We know Pakistan only through media. And media, I hope, I hope one doesn't confuse the term knowledge and media information at all. Sri Lanka we know nothing about. I mean that. So we have closed ourselves to the extent that at in the first half of the 20th century, maybe even the middle of the 20th century, Bengali books were translated into Gujarati regularly. I grew up in a village in Maharashtra, a very small village, 5,000 population. There was a small library. I read translations of French book in that library in my school days. Victor Hugo was no novelty for me. I mean, Shakespeare's plays I read in Marathi translation. They were bad, awfully bad translations. I mean, please don't tell Shakespeare that he was translated. But that no longer happens. We have become islands, and we become inane islands. So probably our urbanization should have helped, but that has not helped in that respect. And culture itself is now becoming a source of stress for us, because culture has become expensive for the state. Culture has become unaffordable for the parents. Culture is waste of time for young people. Culture is too taxing for the memory. Nobody likes to read books. Nobody likes to listen to good music. The fewer the languages in the world, the better for such governments. That is the idea. And so, so everything is being done by, it is being done by those who are in some sections of the corporate world, in pharmaceuticals, in governments, to reduce the number of languages. And as every language is a unique worldview, every word is a dictionary, whole library. Every word is a whole library. So you take the language away. You know that story of Andaman woman who died in 26 January 3 years back. 85,000 years of continuous history of knowledge of the waves disappeared with the death of that woman. 800 languages in India, about 300 are likely to die in the next 10 years. I mean, I have so much pain in my heart saying this, because I counted all those languages and I know they are dying. Anjana Ben, no Siddhis were there in Maharashtra and Gujarat. Siddhis no longer remember their own words. So memory gets twisted. And the idea of the space that we have is already truncated, because our idea of space is in the television. We have vast spaces in television and no space outside. So, 10 years from now, where India will be, well, I don't think that doom is a large word. It's time consuming. So doom does not take place in a single day. And I believe in the people of India. Honestly, I'm not from Aam Aadmi Party, but I really believe in the people, and they have their wisdom. Just as they hit back the British, others before them, this time also they will act. So I have faith in the people, but passive faith is no good. One has to have active strategy for this. And the best is, rather than talking politics and opposing political parties using their ways, it is good to encourage creativity wherever it is possible in such a way that diversity gets showcased, foregrounded, nurtured. Mahatma Gandhi, I believe in his book Hind Swaraj. There he says, if you want to drive, there's a dialogue between two characters. One is an extremist, other is Gandhi-like. So the extremist says, I want to drive the British out. The mild one says, but why do you want to drive them out? Then we can rule. So how will you rule? We'll rule exactly the way they are doing. I mean, much better than they are doing. So Gandhi says, then why do you do that? Let them rule if you want to do the same thing. So, so getting into politics and to behave like political parties or to getting into the corporate world to change the corporate world is not. I think we should stick to our lanes, our tracks. We sing, we write, we think, we speak. Voice is the best weapon against tyranny. And humor is the best weapon against dictatorship. So 10 years from now, I see lot many new jokes have come our way. And I will be thankful to the people for that.
Rajni Bakshi. Ganesh, Ram Guha has somewhere suggested that by giving up this English language at a basic school level, apparently this happened some 30-40 years ago in Gujarat, that may have had a role in the kind of ferocity of, how shall we say, not intolerance, but narrowing of spaces. And you know, it's not just about Hindu-Muslim or caste rioting, but for example, the kind of close-mindedness that even we experienced in the Narmada Bachao Andolan, the unwillingness to think and talk collectively about the dam. Because I mean, I think the dam is a better example, because you would think that less emotions and less potential for blood spilling in an issue like that. So is there a point? Is there something about that narrowing, the same kind of narrowing that you referred to, that those kind of translations don't happen? So this just a thought.
Ram is a friend and is always very charming, and he's a historian of contemporary India, and he's always very accurate. But I remember Gandhi was born in Gujarat, and he was not greatly in love with the English language. Gandhi's analysis about violence was that increased greed increases intolerance. And not all Gujaratis, but the dominating among the Gujaratis have been like the dominating ones among the Kannadigas have been elsewhere also in varying degrees greedy, because we all want more for ourselves. Greed is not to be measured in terms of how much money, bank balance. Greed is universal today because we are taking from the earth more than we can return to the earth. We are drawing out of that balance, the ecological balance. We are drawing more, and therefore all of us are greedy in some or the less or more, higher or lower degree. And that will make us, in Gandhi's analysis, increasingly intolerant on all fronts. Even the advocates of good thoughts are intolerant because they're so aggressive about the goodness of their thoughts. So probably we have to think beyond this. I mean, we have temporary difficulties, but India has fortunately the constitution systems, many people, a great sense of humor, and the most beautiful among the things that we have is the great diversity, which cannot be liquidated and reduced to a homogeneity of a false kind. So our diversity will save us, and we should be okay. I think that's my take. I mean, with Ram's argument, English probably has played that role, but that could be a symptomatic analysis rather than pathological analysis.
Thank you, Ganesh. Good to see you again and hear you. Do you think that Tagore could play a role in revivifying this? My name is Amy Jarazboy. Do you think that Tagore could play a role in education and celebrating this diversity and promoting the romantic, the sensitive approach to India's culture and future and the ecology of this subcontinent?
Tagore as an educator, definitely. I mean, the model of education he created is what we should have picked up. Tagore as a dramatist or as a writer, novelist is okay. I mean, there were other dramatists and writers who probably a little better, but as an educationist he was superb. As a singer, I don't know because I'm not educated in the Ravindra Sangeet. So. Educator, yes. Unfortunately, we had Aurobindo who thought on education. We had later day J. Krishnamurti who thought on education. We had even, vernacular, homemade Bhaurao Patil in Satara, who thought on education. Jyotiba Phule, Ambedkar set up something for education in the Siddharth College, Sydenham College. We ruled out all this. So, after independence, we went through a phase of basic education, which was a mess, like Panchayat Raj is a mess. We used some Gandhian ideas for a while, but in less than 10 years' time, we had given up. I think with the 1962 conflict with China, the ideas of education changed. The 67 report of university, commission, J.P. Naik and the Kothari commission changed altogether. We decided to produce engineers. We imported the Russian model. We set up IITs, which is very good, but we wanted every child to be a genius of an engineering genius. And that has made our entire attitude to development of the human mind, growth of child's composition of society, very imbalanced. Today we want all of them to become finance, services market wizards, or IT barons and so on. And that's once again the problem. We will have to re-educate ourselves, and Tagore can be a great exemplar there. But I don't think we should have uniform like that for everybody. His guards. He made his own clothes. The weaving, spinning with one's own hands is okay, but that design is, we need 21st century designs.
Now, if you will please take the. Please say your name.
Yeah. I'm Kamala Ganesh. You started in the beginning of the lecture, you mentioned what happens when a powerful group and a non-powerful, weaker group interact linguistically. And I don't think you what happened? So what are the models? What happens when this happens? What happens to the languages in your experience? And what do you feel when by natural interaction, not necessarily one of power, but interaction, creoles are formed, and pure languages are not so prominent, but various kinds of creoles emerge. As a language person, as a linguist, how would you evaluate that kind of development? That's the question.
Printing came to us from the West. It in any case would have come to us someday, maybe from China or so. But even if Kannada was printed towards the end of the 18th century and Marathi and Gujarat, Mumbai Samachar had started, the main printing factory, the station was in St. Fort Williams, Calcutta, where 6 languages were picked up. Our people responded to the print technology because they were creative, and they responded to every new technique, every new shape of the pen, they responded. When paper came to India in the 13th century, they responded by they started writing what they were singing or composing or remembering or reciting. They started putting the genius in print form as well. And so the languages that got into print, because people responded to that medium, developed printed literature. Before independence, this debate started, and during the Constituent Assembly 1946 to 1949, 4 years, a big debate remained unconcluded, and that's why in the Constitution we have the 8th schedule of languages, for languages, because as I said elsewhere, the debates that got concluded become articles of the Constitution. The debates that remained unfinished became the schedules of the Constitution. जैसे कि हम करते इस मीटिंग में पूरा नहीं हो तो दूसरा मीटिंग के एजेंडा में डालते. The 8th schedule of the languages in the Indian Constitution has 22 languages today. So print technology had that effect on Indian languages. Secondly, the description of languages given by the British linguists to us have segmented our languages in families. And there are serious debates about whether the Dravidian family is genuinely a family or not. Whether it was proposed. Ambedkar has written about, other linguists have written about it. There are reports how, in order to state one's identity, a language family is proposed. One does not know. whether that's a lasting classification, durable classification, even linguistically, scientifically or not. And so one has to offer so many caveats that there are so many tatsams and tadbhavs, and while the grammar of the language is Indo-Aryan, but the vocabulary, grammar is Dravidian, but vocabulary is Indo-Aryan, so on. Grierson and the cartographers before him, linguistic cartographers, linguists before him, posited the idea of dialects. Now, dialect is a sure way of trashing human language. Maybe this is a dialect, okay, but it's spoken by somebody as language. Those people claim it as language, just as Bhakti entire Bhakti literature was out of the Marathi literature or Gujarati literature syllabus in the university for a very long time, because that was Bhakti, not literature. It was not Khandekar or Khanolkar or Phadke or Nemade or Chitre or, so it was Bhakti, trashed out. So this was a major cultural surgery. And because of the schedule, 8th schedule in the constitution, today the non-scheduled languages are simply languishing and dying. Because all expenditure on education has to be committed within the framework of the 8th schedule of the constitution. Government is, cannot just spend money on promoting Korku language. Then the Korkus don't get employment in their language. Then they get undernourished. Then the government will send doctors and say, well, in any case, they have got a genetic disorder called sickle cell, so don't worry, and they will be allowed to die. Language politics caused by the intervention of the British. In the first place, not many British understood many Indian languages. They learned some of them for experience, for political. Earlier in Surat, when they landed in Surat, Armenians used to translate Gujarati to English, English to Gujarati, through Portuguese and Arabic and so on, Persian and so on. Towards the end of the 18th century, because of the Dvidal Paddhati, Marathi Dvidal Paddhati, dual system of governance came in Bengal, the British had to engage with Indian languages. And then they started learning Indian languages. They opined about them. They classified them, described them, labeled them, they nailed them in different categories. India had a good, I'm not promoting things which are gone by, but India genuinely had a very rich history of philosophical thinking about language. If Indian philosophy, Indian history has anything in the best possible way accessible to us today, it is linguistics. In no Indian department of linguistics, Indian linguistics is taught. Phonetics, semantics, all that is, but Indian linguistics is not taught. So, the British intervention made us forget that we knew something about our languages. They made us forget that the language, what we call as languages are languages. They made us forget that language diversity is a rich cultural experience, and they impose English on us. And today, unfortunately, I have to face that question. Rarely another country of this size, of this history, has used another language in such a large way for carrying out all kinds of activities which determined economic welfare of the country. Fortunately, we get born in Indian languages and we die in Indian languages. And to some extent, marriages also happen in Indian languages. Fortunately, we fall in love in an Indian language called Hindi. Because unless you sing some Hindi song, you don't fall in love. I mean, it's not real. But English, otherwise, English today is an Indian language, and it better be an Indian language. Let the British forget that it was their language. We must all start writing books how some English people learned English from us, Bombay Walas, and propagate that view. After 2-3 centuries, it will become popular and they will accept the version, just as we accepted their version, that we learnt linguistics from them. Thank you.
I would like to thank you for your immensely, for this lovely, I'm Vibha Surana. And first of all, I would like to thank you for your wonderful, thought-provoking and very, very enjoyable journey across time and space on arts, aesthetics, and language. And I would like to pick up two threads from your talk. One is on language and the other on diversity. You've been an advocate, you've been a cultural activist for languages through decades now. What we are seeing today is a mix of languages. When we speak languages, there is a lot of diversity, lots of code switching happening. What we call khichdi or English, or sometimes it's more than 3, 4, 5 languages. So what we are speaking today are not, say, Hindi or Marathi or Kannada, but it's a mix of a few languages related to a particular group wherever one is interacting. So on the one hand, you are sorry and you are sad about the demise of what you said, 300 out of 800 Indian languages. And on the other, you are also advocating diversity. And if we were to take it forward, and if you were to say, okay, diversity and freedom, even in expression, and just talk whatever comes to your mind. So what is your position there? I mean, would you advocate, what kind of language would you advocate? Because combining the two, what kind of position would come out? That would be my question.
The history of human languages can be stretched to about 5 lakh years when sounds were made, 70,000 years when sentences, meaningful sentences, about 30,000 years when complex tenses are introduced in languages and so on. In all these 70,000 years, just about a couple of 100 years, when children were forced to speak correct, because a certain kind of schooling was introduced, which accompanied the print technology. Standardized language was a gift of print technology. Nobody before that ever spoke just correct language. And nobody from our time on will speak just correct language, because fortunately we're returning to the oral again. So it's a very small, short phase, aberration, correct language. Language is language. Whatever is spoken communicates. In the human brain, there is no compartment, separate compartment for Italian as against German, or Gujarati as against Parsi Gujarati, or Kokni Marathi, or Goanese Kokni, Malayalam Kokni, and so Kerala Kokni. Language is like atmosphere, and I'm not using this as saying this as a metaphor. Atmosphere admits no vacuum, and language admits no vacuum. Take away my language, and if I am human, I'll invent a language or use whichever language comes my way, no matter which language. I'm saying this not as a metaphor, I said, because language is an essential feature acquired by the human animal in the evolutionary progress, evolutionary journey, and there's no going back on it anymore. The day we cease to have language, we won't be humans, we'll be another animal, maybe a little better. But so in the human evolution, because our contact with the earth is the least as compared to other animals, fish, birds, animals remain parallel to the earth. We are the only ones that are perpendicular to the earth because of the structure of the spine. I'm not saying this as some these actually these evolutionary theories of linguistic development and so on admit these ideas. These are debatable, but these are stated ideas. And because we know the earth, because of our reduced access to the earth, we invented signs to name objects, making language, as you know much better than I do. So language is and language has now conditioned our functioning of the brain. The flow of serotonin or dopamine in the brain is conditioned by language. The day I become ill, first my language starts we don't have to complain about politicians who speak bad language, because that predicts a certain illness inside. These are proven pathological theories, psychological theories. Bararne, Marathi Shabda, I don't know how many of you, Bararne say. That is a completely trackless sound making exercise. Sorry. Language is like our fingers, which helped us hold things and move technologically forward in the past, in the process of evolution, which made it possible in the past for us to move forward technologically. Language is human. It's not outside human. But language is not an individual member of the species, but language is human in the collective being of the species. So language connects us. Language made our societies. They made communities, and therefore communication, communitas. So it does not matter which language we use. Humans have never used grammatically correct language, except for that professor who was trying to teach Eliza Doolittle, T. Fularani. Language is beautiful when it is wrong. Poets make a great effort to produce wrong language so that it is beautiful, and so on. So why worry about grammar? I mean, grammar is necessary for teachers, school teachers in the 7th pay commission, but not otherwise. Please don't consider my disregard for these things very seriously, but please consider my pain for loss of diversity seriously.
Sir, this is Ravi Kulkarni. When you said about the British influence, one single person, if it comes to my mind, is Thomas Babington Macaulay. What do you have to say about his role in either destruction or unification, or whichever way you look at it?
In 1828, Elphinstone was asked to produce a report on education in India, which he produced and sent to Calcutta, because Calcutta was the capital. He had counted more than 5,000 schools, functioning schools, in Gujarat and it was not Gujarat and Maharashtra, it was Bombay Presidency then. In Bengal, a report on colleges was, there were native colleges, it seems. And you get this information in a book by a Gandhian educationist, Dharampal. The education before the British, and it's a report on British reports on education. His evidence, what are the British producers' reports? Macaulay spent 4 years in India, and he was very young when he came here. I spent 40 years trying to read Indian literature and have not managed to read even 1/10 of it. So in his 4 years, obviously, I cannot expect him to know everything about Indian literature. So if he said that India has no literature worth the name, etc., we have to pardon him for that. We cannot punish him. At the most, we don't give him the BA degree of Bombay University. That's okay. But Macaulay was conservative in politics. He thought that he was spreading empire, protecting it. and he introduced English. But let us not forget that, and we accepted, and in 1830, then Wood's Dispatch, and 57 or 58, our university comes up here in Madras, Calcutta. But let us not forget the fact that before Macaulay introduced this idea, 3 decades before that, our own people in Calcutta, what was then the Hindu College, which was kind of high school, dignified high school, Michael Madhusudan Dutt, Henry Derazio, they are asking for education in English. Rajaram Mohan Rai, I respect him a lot. He spent good many years in London visiting every MP, requesting for education in English in India. Because we thought that English language will bring us close to modernity. We thought the English language is modernity, just as we think that, that figure of Saraswati is knowledge. Because we had that upbringing. We believed that symbol itself is the substance. We did not believe in the separation between symbol and substance. So English became the symbol for modernity. English became symbol for strength and power. And so we pursued it. But let's not feel bad about it. Think of cricket. And every time you feel bad about English, think of cricket. We pursued cricket and we're doing quite well in it. And I don't want to send cricket back to England. Similarly, I don't want to send the English language back to England. Let's cultivate it. Like birds bring seeds from wherever and plants grow and a forest comes up. People bring languages. In this country, languages have come from, Burmese have brought the Karen language to India. It is spoken in the Andamans. Siddhis from Africa brought their language. The Parsis forgot their original language, but Siddhis retained it till very recently. The Arabs brought Arabic. Language came from Persia. Chinese, Bhuti language has come to us. Languages from all over the world should come to us. Language is good. English is a language, and therefore it also can be good. It is bad because it distributes our society into haves and those who will never have. And that we can change without having to change the English language. And one good news, I heard it said the other day, don't tell anybody, when everybody in India learns the English language, the employment will be available in Hindi or Bhojpuri. So don't worry.
On behalf of Dr. Ashok Dharanade Memorial Trust, I am here to give vote of thanks. First of all, I thank Dr. Ganesh Devi for this fascinating speech he delivered, and very apt as a tribute to Dr. Ranade's thoughts. I'll also like to thank Whistling Woods and especially Mr. Chandrasekhar for helping us in documentation of this lecture. I'll also like to thank NCPA staff, especially Amrita. And last but not the least, this very eager audience and for attending this lecture and interacting with us. And so let's meet next year for the third lecture. Thank you.